One question has divided humanity since its beginnings, a question that touches the deepest part of our fear and our hope. Are we alone in the universe? Civilizations have built pyramids, cathedrals, and mandirs in response. But in the 20th century, two men dared to ask it from a completely new place. Not from theology, but from the dark hallways of the human mind. Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung observed the phenomenon of religious faith and arrived at conclusions as opposite as heaven and hell. One called it the great collective neurosis, the other, the deepest psychological need. Today you will discover why this intellectual battle defines not only your spirituality, but the very essence of what it means to be human. Prepare for a journey that will cast doubt on your most deeply held certainties. For Sigmund Freud, father of psychoanalysis, religion was not an encounter with the divine. It was an illusion, a massive psychological construct designed to soothe the unbearable anguish of a fragile creature aware of its mortality. In his work, The Future of an Illusion, Freud was devastating. Religion is the universal obsessive neurosis of humanity. It stems, according to him, from the infantile prolongation of our desire for protection. The child, helpless, projects the figure of an all-powerful father who cares for him and sets rules. The adult, terrified by the forces of nature, death, and his own aggressiveness, repeats that mechanism on a cosmic scale. He invents a heavenly father. Thus, religion fulfills a clear, but pathological, psychological function. It relieves anxiety, offers comfort, and explains the inexplicable through myths, but at an enormous cost. For Freud, religion is a regressive force that keeps humanity in a state of psychic infantilism, preventing its maturation towards a reality governed by science and reason. It is, in essence, a desire for collective delusion. The religious ceremony, the obsessive ritual, are not very different from the compulsive acts of a neurotic who washes his hands over and over to appease an unconscious guilt. Faith, in this framework, is a symptom. However, a man who walked for a time with Freud felt that this diagnosis was a mutilation of the soul. Carl Gustav Jung saw in religion something radically different. Not a neurosis, but the natural and healthy expression of an intrinsic psychological need. For Jung, the human psyche has a structure that inherently seeks meaning, connection, and wholeness. At the center of his theory is the collective unconscious, populated by archetypes. And one of the most powerful archetypes is the God archetype, the image of divinity. This image is not an invention to calm fear, but a psychic fact, an organ of the psyche as real as the stomach is to the body. Religiosity, therefore, is not optional. It is a psychological function necessary for balance. Jung distinguished between institutional religion, which could become dogmatic, and personal religious experience, which he called numinous experience, an overwhelming encounter with the sacred that transforms the individual. This experience arises when consciousness comes into contact with these deep archetypal contents. For Jung, the crisis of modern man, his existential void and anxiety, did not come from having religion, but from having lost it. By discrediting and repressing this spiritual need, the energy of the God archetype does not disappear. It becomes distorted and emerges as political fanaticism, addiction to consumption, or pathological devotion to a leader. The psyche demands a unifying center, and if you don't give it a religious symbol, it will invent one with other materials. Think of an everyday example. A person faces a devastating loss. From the Freudian perspective, their return to prayer or their search for a meaning in suffering would be a return to the fantasy of the consoling father, a defense mechanism to avoid sinking into absolute despair, a kind of necessary but childish self-deception. From the Jungian perspective, that same impulse would be the psyche activating its own healing resources. The religious symbol, an angel, the idea of the soul, the reframing of pain, would act as a bridge to the archetype of transformation, helping the person integrate the traumatic experience into a broader narrative of their life, facilitating the individuation process. One sees illness, the other, medicine. Here we introduce the controversial element, the idea that will make you reconsider your own stance, whether you are a believer or not. What if Freud and Jung were not talking about the same thing? What if Freud, the Viennese doctor, brilliantly dissected the pathological shell of religion, its repressive dogmas, and its neurotic rituals? While Jung, the sage of Zurich, described the healthy and vital core that resides within that shell, the spark of the numinous that seeks expression. This leads us to an uncomfortable question for our secular age. By declaring religion a mere infantile illusion, as much of post-Freudian scientific thought has done, are we curing a neurosis, or are we amputating, in the name of reason, an essential organ of the psyche that will later generate worse pathologies? Is our modern epidemic of anxiety, lack of purpose, and rootlessness the price for having silenced that psychological need that Jung spoke of? The rupture between both thinkers was, on this point, total and irreconcilable. Freud accused Jung of being a mystic, of retreating to pre-scientific thought. Jung saw in Freud a brilliant man, but limited by his own materialism, unable to understand the symbolic and spiritual dimensions of psychic reality. This is not a fight from old books. It is the conflict that lives within every modern person, who on one hand values reason and evidence, and on the other feels an inexplicable longing for connection, awe, and something that transcends the material. So when you see a debate about faith and science, when you wonder about the meaning of life in a quiet moment, or when you observe the blind fervor for a political cause or a brand, remember, two voices whisper from the foundations of modern psychology. One tells you to seek the infantile root of your longing. The other invites you to listen to that longing as the voice of something deeper and wiser in you, asking to be integrated. It is not about choosing between the church or the couch. It is about understanding that the religious dimension, in its broadest sense, is an inescapable fact of psychic existence. You can pathologize it or you can cultivate it, but you cannot erase it. If this exploration of the abysses of faith and reason resonated with you, then we have achieved our purpose. But your voice is essential to continue this dialogue. In the comments, I want you to tell me honestly, which way does your scale tip? Do you believe religion is primarily a collective neurosis, as Freud argued, or a deep and irreplaceable psychological need, as Jung defended? Your personal perspective is the most valuable data. And if you want to continue these journeys to the confines of the mind, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and every comment not only supports this channel, but ignites a spark of global conversation about what truly makes us human. The debate has just begun.